Hello! This is going to be a build guide for the Poison Trail of Caltrops Tactician that I've been playing. I know a few people have done versions of this over the last little while, but yeah, this is just what I've been playing. So the build revolves around the Splinter of Lorati. For the lines, any number of poisons from this weapon can affect a target at the same time, and always poison on hit with this weapon. This basically means that you don't need to worry about maximum number of poisons or poison chance. So because this has really low base damage, we go with Hand of Wisdom in action for the line adds 1 to 10 lightning damage to attacks per 20 intelligence. I have this corrupted up to 1 to 12. This basically lets us get a bunch of flat damage that isn't dependent on the weapon itself. And now this does have the line deal no elemental damage. So to get around that, we use the ring Original Sin, which has the line 100% of elemental damage converted to chaos damage. So that means that we can now convert all of the flat lightning damage that we get from Hand of Wisdom in action into chaos damage, which allows it to poison and also gets around the deal no elemental damage downside of Splinter of Lorati. Because we're scaling intelligence to get damage, it's kind of a no-brainer to use Ascendancy. This just gives a bunch of flat attributes. And it also helps with any attribute requirements you might have for strength or for dexterity. On this we have allocated lasting trauma. This is 30% increased magnitude of elements you inflict and 20% increased duration of damaging elements on enemies. So this is basically just more poison damage and more poison duration. For rares, I'm using a breach ring with life, intelligence, resistances and some flat elemental damage. I have this on a breach ring specifically to get quality for attributes. I don't think it's really important. It's like 10 extra intelligence. You realistically could go with an unset ring or something like that to get an extra skill if you wanted to. The only reason that you would ever really want to do this is if that extra 10 intelligence would bring you over that sort of 20 in break point for each 1 to 10 lightning damage to attacks that you get from Hand of Wisdom in action. Other rares is a high evasion helmet with life, intelligence, resistances and deflection. Then a body armor with life, evasion, deflection, resistances, and then also spirit. Spirit is quite important because the reason that we're doing this on Tactician is so that we can stack as many spirit buffs as possible to make use of Thornskin too. I'll get more into that in a second, but yeah, spirit's quite important. For this exact setup that I have, you'll need around about 365 spirit. So something to keep in mind, but you can basically just pull out buffs as needed. And then as you get more spirit into the gear, you can then add in more spirit buffs. It's not super important. It's just the more spirit you have, the more Thornskin 2s you can have for more increased damage. So that, and then the boots are just evasion, life, movement, speed, resistances, and I could get a deflection on these as well, but I didn't want to put that much currency into it. The belt is again just life and resistances. The charm stuff is just here when I bought it. Then the last thing is the scepter. Specifically, I use a purity scepter for whatever my lowest resistance is. For this one, it was a cold resist was my weakest resistance, so I got a purity of ice shrine scepter. High spirit is the most important thing, and then intelligence after that. And then you can use a rabbit talisman for an extra 10% increased spirit on top of that. But this is 10% of the base spirit of the scepter. So basically it works exactly the same as the explicit mods on the scepter itself. And then for runes on the other gear, I'm using Venomous Rune of Agony for 13% of damage as extra chaos damage in all 3 slots. Before you get a lot of intelligence for Hand of Wisdom in action, use flat fire damage runes because they, I believe, have the best average. Then obviously with Original Sin it just gets converted into chaos anyway, so it doesn't really matter what it is, but I think fire damage has just slightly more than the other two. And then once you get to level 50 you can put in the there's a rune that gives like the highest amount of flat fire. And then as you get more intelligence, you can start swapping those out for the Venomous Rune of Agony to get more overall damage. Then the rest of it is literally just Iron Rune, Iron Rune, Iron Runes, and then I get a Lightning Res rune here to get me Captain Lightning Res. Because there's not a lot of base defenses on hand of Wisdom in Action themselves, so basically it's just not worth using an iron rune in here. And then for the charms, it's just a silver charm for slows, and then an amethyst charm to get chaos res capped when necessary. Now, we'll quickly run over the skills. Again, from the Shrine Scepter, we do use Purity of Ice for cold res. Then on that, we have Thornskin 2 for 70% increased thorns damage. Cannibalism 2 for 3% of maximum life recovered on kill while a support skill is active. Vitality 2 for life regen. Herbalism 2 for life recovery from flasks. Now, one thing to note is, for the Shrine Scepters, any Spirit Gem or any support gem that you have in here that takes Spirit will not add anything to your Spirit cost. You'll see I have 4 Spirit, I take it out, I still have 4 Spirit. So you can put as many Spirit buffs into these as you can, and it doesn't matter how much they cost, they're basically free. This is a bug. If you don't want to use bugs in any of your builds, you just take these out. It's really not a huge issue. You're not losing that much. But yeah, that is entirely up to you. The bread and butter of the build is Trail of Caltrops. So this is basically a spirit gem that, when active, reserves 30 spirit, and then anytime you dodge roll while this is active, you'll shit out some Caltrops on the ground that deal attack damage in an area and maim. You can have a maximum of 20 Caltrops, an extra 5 maximum Caltrops from quality. They have base physical damage, but they also scale with percentage damage from your weapon. So that's how this actually, that's what allows this to work with Splinter of Larata. This basically counts as weapon damage. So now you'll also see here, increases and reductions to Thorns damage applied to hit damage with this skill. So that means that using Thornskin 2, we can get a bunch of increased Thorns damage. See, I've got one in every single one of these, is the reason why we play Tactician with this. And then on Trail of Caltrops, we have 100% more magnitude of poison from Deadly Poison 2. Close Combat 2 for 30% more attack damage to enemies within 1 meter of you. This only applies if you're within 1 meter while they're taking damage from the Caltrops. But once the poison is applied, it doesn't matter anymore. But this really is only here for bosses or general single target. Because with bosses or single target, you'll be rolling around in circles like Dark Souls PvP anyway, just around about their feet. Nova projectiles for 4 additional projectiles. This, you can try multi-shot for better base damage, but less projectiles, which means more inconsistent overlap on your projectiles, because that's kind of the most important thing with Caltrops, is getting consistent overlap. So you can play around either multi-shot or Nova projectiles. Nova projectiles is what felt most comfortable for me. That's what I went with. Rearm 2 for hazards created by support skills have 30% chance to rearm after they're triggered. The reason that I went with this is because when a Caltrop is triggered, when it rearms, it's no longer counted towards your maximum. So say for example, you throw out 10 Caltrops, and all of those 10 Caltrops rearm after they're triggered. You now have 10 Caltrops that don't count to your 20 Caltrop maximum. So it really does help kind of stack up more damage, especially on bosses. And then I'm using Magnified Area 2 for increased area of effect, because again, overlap is really important. So my Caltrops have 0.7 Caltrop radius, or 0.7 meter Caltrop radius, over the 0.5 base. It really does feel so much better getting to at least 0.7. Then the other one we're using is Herald of Blood, with Thornskin 2, obviously, Bursting Plague, Poison 3, Bleed 3, and then Bone Shrapnel. Bone Shrapnel I don't think actually ever really does anything. I just wanted to throw it in here to try it, and then I just never took it out, because it does rock sometimes. But basically, the reason that we use this is Herald of Blood is a herald that when you kill an enemy with blood loss, they will explode, dealing unscalable physical damage, which normally can't bleed. However, it can poison. So using Poison 3, we can then poison with Herald of Blood, which applies Bursting Plague. And Bursting Plague, once an enemy dies, they'll explode with physical damage, which that can bleed. So we use Bleed 3 to apply bleed to Bursting Plague. and then you can proliferate Herald of Blood with that. And then Bone Shrapnel is because with Tactician you pin constantly, and then if Herald of Blood does kill an enemy, then you'll get these Bone Shrapnel explosions which deal a decent chunk of physical damage. 25% of the pin target's maximum life is physical damage. It's pretty good when it does happen. And then we're using Herald of Plague, for Thornskin 2, Cannibalism 1, Chaos Mastery, because the higher the level of Herald of Plague, the bigger the spread is of the poison. It spreads the most damaging poison, so the highest DPS poison on the enemy will then spread to nearby enemies in a 1.8 meter radius with a level 19 gem. Then we're using Wind Dancer for Thornskin 2, Bleed 3, Culling Strike 2, and then Precision 2. You don't really need any of these. You could definitely probably leave Precision 2 out. It's just I wanted to get as high an accuracy rating as I could, and I'm pretty sure I'm probably at 100% accuracy. You really don't need this. So you could probably shave off some of the spirit requirements with this. So Wind Dancer is a buff that gives you 10% more evasion per stage, up to 3 stages, so 30% more evasion rating. Then, whenever you're hit by an enemy, it consumes all stages to trigger Gale Force, which is an attack that knocks enemies back in an AoE, which means we can also use it to, because it's an attack, we can use it to bleed, and then that allows Herald of Blood to trigger more often. Culling Strike, just because I could throw Culling Strike into it, and then a Precision again was just accuracy. Time of Need is just a cheap spirit gem that gives some usefulness in giving some life recovery. It removes curses and elemental ailments every 10 seconds or so. I think the duration I've got is slightly lower, 6.7 seconds, because we use Compressed Duration 2, or 35% less skill effect duration. Blasphemy, which turns Socket Curse skills into auras. Then we're using Thornskin 2, obviously. Despair, because it's a poison build, it deals chaos damage. We're using Heightened Curse for 25% increased magnitudes, and we're using Ritualistic Curse for 50% increased area of effect. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you use say for example Magnified Area, you'll actually increase the cost of Blasphemy itself, the spirit cost. So that's why we use Ritualistic Curse instead, because we don't care about the curse delay, and this just gives them more area of effect. Withering Presence, kind of, again, thorns damage, and then more skill effect duration. Withering Presence just basically takes withers enemies in your presence, which increases the chaos damage they take. Each stack of Wither is 5% increased chaos damage taken, up to 10 stacks. I don't know if you quite hit 10 stacks, but stuff dies way faster than it ever matters. Then we're using Cast on Dodge. We have Thornskin 2 because it's a spirit gem. Then we use Contagion because Contagion, when an enemy dies, while afflicted by the Contagion debuff, it'll spread all other chaos damage over time debuffs on that enemy to all nearby enemies and refresh their duration, and this includes poison. And now the quality was changed this patch, make it so that Contagion targets multiple enemies per cast. So we can use Cast on Dodge with Contagion to basically throw out 3 Contagions into a pack and then proliferate all of those poisons through the pack again, and then also proliferate the strongest poison from Herald of Plague. And on this we're also using Boundless Energy for increased energy, gain, and then Energy Retention for a chance to refund half their energy cost, and then Magnified Area for basically just increased spread. And then the last thing is War Banner. You don't really need to use this. This again is just more single target damage. It basically gain glory, then you throw down the banner and it creates an aura that gives you 25% more attack damage, increased accuracy rating, and attack speed that you don't care about. And then with the current setup that I have, it's 30% more attack damage. And then because it is on Tactician, you gain glory over time without having to hit anything. But on this we use Thornskin 2, we use Prolonged Duration just to make it last longer, Magnified Area 2 to make the area bigger, and then Duresto's Passion so that it requires 50% less glory. So instead of requiring 200 glory, it requires 100 glory, and you just have it up more often. You have 100% uptime on bosses, or you have 100% uptime all the time if you want to, but that's on bosses is kind of when you're going to use it. So that covers all of the skills, I believe. So now we can go and look at the actual tree and the Ascendancy and stuff like that. So we're using Tactician. The main reason we're using Tactician is a solid plan. Persistent buffs have 50% less reservation. That means that where Trail of Caltrops reserves 30 spirit, this actually reserves 15. And then for things like Herald of Blood, it's 15. And then Thornskin 2, where it normally is 40 spirit, it is instead 20 spirit. One thing I will quickly note before I forget is, if you take it out, you will notice that it says that you don't have enough to use it, even though it has 50%, because the 50% less reservation is only applied once it's on. So you just deactivate, put the support gem in, reactivate, and you'll be fine. So 50% less reservation of persistent buffs, so we can stack as many thorn skins as possible. Whoever pays best for banners gain 5 glory per second. This is, if you don't want to use the banner at all, you can move on to something else. I don't think there's too many that are worth using. Maybe polish that gear for some ailment threshold if you really wanted to. But yeah, I'm using whoever pays best because for more single target. Suppressing fire for more immobilization build up. And then right we want them for projectile damage, build, pin, and pinned enemies cannot perform actions. What this means is when an enemy is pinned, they're effectively stunned for the entire duration of the pin. They cannot do anything. Even T3 Zesht, even Uber Arbiter. Once their pin build up hits 100%, they just cease to function. It's really good for defensive, and it just lets you focus on rolling around in circles. So that's kind of where we're going. Immobilization, just to, as a quick point, is basically frozen, pinned, heavy stun, or electrocuted. So for the tree, obviously while leveling, you want to get whatever attributes you need. Trail of Caltrops itself, I think, is a level 8 uncut spirit gem. So you can basically start leveling with it from there, because by the time you get to that, you'll also be able to equip Original Sin, Splinter of Lorata, and Hand of Wisdom in action. So you can basically level with this as soon as you're able to get Trail of Caltrops equipped. So you basically just, whatever attribute requirements you need, fill those in first, and then after you've got Astramentus on, which is level 24, you could use that again at the same time. If you have it, you can use it, and then it wouldn't matter. But basically you just fill out all these as intelligence, come down here for the Jewel Socket. Then we go down here and we grab Light on Your Feet for movement speed and immune to hinder and maim, because your dodge roll speed is determined exclusively by your movement speed. So anything that makes your movement, that slows your movement speed, is going to slow your dodge roll speed. It just makes it feel a lot worse. So Light on Your Feet for that. Momentum for ignore all movement penalties from armor, and then slowing potency debuffs reduced. This also gives a little bit of movement speed from these nodes here as well. Then we grab this keystone here that has been converted to Nightly Tenets. Gain no inherent bonus from intelligence and a 1% increased evasion rating per 2 intelligence. This comes from the Heroic Tragedy Timeless Jewel. Specifically an Allroth one. Remembrancing X Songworthy Deeds by the line of Allroth. This is the one that gives you this keystone. And this keystone gives you evasion rating per 2 intelligence. Obviously we're stacking intelligence for damage, and now we're stacking it for defenses as well. And you can see here, I have 29,000 evasion rating, and if you pull this out, you lose around about 10,000 evasion, so it is really, really good. And your mana doesn't matter, you're not casting any skills, so how much mana you have is irrelevant. So that's why we use that. And it's clinging on with its fingertips onto actually being able to reach that. So then we come down here, we grab Polymathy for 7% increased attributes. Obviously, attributes are what we're doing. Over here to Deterioration, damage and ailments can be inflicted on you while you already have one, but mostly for 20% increased magnitude of damage and ailments you inflict. We come over here, and then you can grab the Cunning Fox. This gives you one more Caltrop. You don't really need to take these. What you could probably do, instead of taking these, is just grab Gem Enthusiast, down the intelligence line, and that would give you 5% increased maximum life and 5% increased movement speed. Yeah. You would need to throw in one more int gem somewhere, or one more int support gem. But yeah, you could grab that pretty easy. Or sorry, one more dex support gem. Then we come up here to careful consideration for 100% increased evasion rating if you haven't been hit recently. You don't get hit all that often. Wasting for increased duration of damage and ailments on enemies. We grab hindering obstacles for increased hazard immobilization buildup and increased slow magnitude, because Caltrops maim any enemy they hit, so this is just a good benefit. But the main reason we take this is to go into widespread coverage. 50% increased hazard area of effect. Like I said, getting as much area of effect as possible is really important. We path into here for the spring hair. 20% chance for damage of enemies hitting you to be unlucky. 20% chance for damage with hits to be lucky. This probably isn't like super duper important, but the movement speed from here is kind of nice. You could probably throw this into more evasion or something if you wanted to. Up here to avoiding deflection for increased deflection rating. This does have a penalty to the amount of damage prevented by deflection, and that's why we take enduring deflection to get increased evasion rating and then get a little bit of that deflected damage back. Or deflected damage mitigation back. We come up here to inevitable rupture, 10% chance for attack hits to apply 10 incision. This is basically just to apply bleed for the Herald of Blood proliferations. It's not like perfectly consistent, because obviously it's a 10% chance. You get 40% chance to apply incision here, and then 10% chance to apply 10 incision, and then incision itself is a 10% chance to inflict bleed per stack. But you hit quite a lot, so it does trigger frequently enough. And then up here to grab a jewel socket, we grab Escalating Mayhem for 50% increased damage. Over here to Efficient Contraptions for 50% chance for hazards to rearm after they're triggered. Again, rearmed Caltrops don't count towards your maximum. We come up here for the Winter Owl. This gives 3% increased evasion rating per turn intelligence. Gives accuracy rating equal to your intelligence and then some intelligence. I path through the evasion rating side. We come up here for Bestial Skin for just more evasion rating from your body armor, and then Enhanced Reflexes for increased evasion rating, increased deflection rating, and a bit of extra dexterity. Path into the Howling Primate for presence area of effect for Wither. Aura skills have 10% increased magnitude and intelligence. This is just because your your curses and your Wither are both auras. These are both scaled by this. And then we path up here into Escalating Toxins. This basically just doubles your base poison duration, which is really good on bosses, and just in general, really. Now for jewels, it is increased duration of damage and ailments on enemies, increased magnitude of poison you inflict. These are the two most important stats, but then you can also get increased damage with spears and increased attack damage. But at least 10% of both of these stats is really good. This is what makes it feel a lot better. So those are kind of the important things. And then a Prism of Belief for +3 to the level of all Trail of Caltrops skills. That kind of covers everything. And then obviously another duration and magnitude jewel down here, one here. But yeah, that basically covers everything, I think. If you have any questions at all, throw them into the comments. I'll answer basically anything about the game, even if it's not specifically about this build. And if you try it out, let me know how it goes. Thanks for watching.